Zara was 22 years old, and she had learned a long time ago that dreams and money did not always walk together. She lived in Houston, Texas, with her mother Farida and her younger brother Zain, in a small apartment on the edge of the city. Her father had passed away when she was only 7 years old, leaving her mother alone to raise 2 children in a country that was not always kind to a widow with little money and a heavy accent. Zara wore the hijab with pride. She had grown up in a home where faith was not just something you talked about, but something you lived, quietly and honestly, day after day. Her mother had taught her that modesty was not weakness, and that hard work was not shameful, no matter how small the job was. Right now, Zara was studying at a community college nearby, working toward a business degree. In the evenings, she worked at a small grocery store owned by a family friend, folding boxes and helping customers at the register. The money she earned went straight into a shared envelope at home, used for rent, groceries, and Zane's school supplies. There was rarely anything left over. She remembered clearly the winter 2 years earlier when their apartment heater had broken down in the middle of January, and there had not been enough money to fix it right away. Farida had sewn extra blankets from old fabric scraps, and the 3 of them had slept close together in the living room for almost 2 weeks, wearing jackets indoors, waiting for enough money to call a repairman. Zara had never complained about it out loud, not once, but she remembered thinking, during those cold nights, that she was tired of every small emergency turning into a crisis simply because there was no cushion, no extra money set aside for anything unexpected. "You work too hard," her mother told her one evening as Zara came home late, still wearing her work apron under her coat. "You are always tired." "Somebody has to help, Mom," Zara said, kissing her mother's cheek. "It's okay. I don't mind." But the truth was, she did think about it often, late at night when the apartment was quiet and Zain was already asleep. She thought about how different life could be if things were easier. She thought about finishing her degree without worrying about bills. She thought about her mother resting instead of sewing late into the night for extra money. She thought about a future that felt steady instead of shaky. Zara had started thinking seriously about marriage, not as an escape, but as something real. A partnership where 2 people worked side by side to build a better life. She did not want an easy way out. She wanted a real team, someone who shared her values and her goals, someone she could grow with. She spoke to her mother about it one quiet Sunday morning while they sat together in the kitchen, drinking tea before the day began. "I've been thinking, Mom," Zara said carefully, "about marriage. Not right now, not rushing anything, but I think I'm ready to start looking the right way, with your blessing." Her mother looked at her closely. "What kind of man are you looking for, Beta?" "Someone practicing," Zara said. "Someone honest and kind. Someone who respects his mother the way I hope he'll respect me. I don't care about a big wedding or expensive gifts. I just want a simple nikah and a real partner." Her mother smiled softly, though there was worry behind her eyes too. "That is a good way to think, Zara. But be careful. Not everyone who says the right words means them." Zara did not fully understand what her mother meant. Not yet. She would learn it soon enough. Word spread slowly through their small community, the way it always did. Farida mentioned it to a few trusted friends at the mosque, and within a few weeks, families began reaching out with names of possible matches. Zara sat through several introductions that spring, some in person after prayers on Friday, others through video calls with families living in other states. The first man she was introduced to was named Hamza, a software engineer living in San Jose, California. He seemed polite enough during their first phone call, asking about her studies and her family, laughing easily at small jokes, complimenting her for balancing school and work at the same time. Zara had hung up that first evening feeling cautiously hopeful, already imagining, just a little, what a future in California might look like. But during their second conversation, his questions shifted in a way that made Zara uncomfortable. "So your father passed away," Hamza said. "That must have been hard financially. I mean, no offense, but I want to understand what I'd be taking on if we moved forward." Zara felt her stomach tighten. "My family is not asking you to take on anything," she said carefully. "I work, I support my mother and brother. If we marry, I would continue helping them, the same as I do now." "Right, of course," Hamza said quickly, though something in his tone stayed the same, careful and calculating, like he was still doing math in his head. "It's just, my parents will ask. They always want to know if the girl's family will need ongoing support, financially, after the wedding. I have to be able to answer them properly." "And what will you tell them?" Zara asked, her voice steady despite the tightness in her chest. "I don't know yet," Hamza admitted. "I'm still figuring out the numbers, honestly." Zara sat with that answer for a moment, understanding, more clearly than she wanted to, that he was measuring her family's hardship as a kind of liability rather than simply a part of who she was. The conversation ended soon after, and Zara declined a third call. If you are enjoying this story so far, please like this video and subscribe for more emotional English stories. Now, let's continue. A few weeks later, another family reached out, this time about a man named Tariq, living in Chicago, Illinois, working as a pharmacist. His family seemed warm on the phone, and the first meeting, held over video with both families present, went smoothly. Tariq spoke gently, asked thoughtful questions, and seemed genuinely interested in Zara's studies and her goals. But during a private conversation a week later, arranged so the two of them could speak alone, Tariq brought up something that surprised her. "My mother mentioned that your family doesn't have much," he said, not unkindly, but bluntly. "I just want to be honest, Zara. My family has certain expectations for the wedding. A proper venue, a good dinner, matching outfits for the families. It reflects on us, you understand. I know you said you wanted something simple, but that's not really how we do things." Zara felt her chest tighten again, this time with a different kind of disappointment. "I told your mother clearly, from the first conversation, that we cannot afford a big wedding. That's not because we don't want to honor the occasion. It's because we simply don't have that kind of money. I thought that was understood." "I know," Tariq said. "I just thought maybe once we got closer, you'd feel differently." Zara ended that conversation firmly, thanking him for his honesty, but making clear that nothing had changed on her end. After she hung up, she sat on the edge of her bed for a long time, staring at the wall, feeling something heavier than simple disappointment settle over her. She thought about how easily Tariq's family had spoken about Dean and character during that first video call, using all the right words, the words every family used when they wanted to appear humble and sincere. And yet, underneath those words, there had still been an expectation that Zara's family would somehow stretch beyond their means to prove they belonged, to prove they were worthy of the match, as if simplicity and honesty were not already enough on their own. It struck her, sitting there, how strange it was that people could talk about faith so easily while still measuring a person's worth by the size of a wedding hall. "Maybe I'm asking for too much," she told her mother that night, her voice quiet. "Maybe wanting someone who values character over money is unrealistic." Farida sat down beside her daughter and took her hand. "You are not asking for too much, Zara. You are asking for exactly the right things. It just takes patience to find someone who actually means what he says, instead of someone who says the right words during the meeting and shows his real face later." "How do I know the difference, though? Both of them sounded good at first." "You watch," her mother said. "Not just what a man says about Dean and character. You watch how he treats people who cannot do anything for him, how he speaks about his mother, how he responds when things don't go exactly his way. Words are easy, Zara. Patterns take longer to fake." Zara held on to those words in the months that followed, even as the search continued slowly, with a few more introductions that ended quickly, for smaller reasons that still left her feeling a little more tired each time. She began to wonder, quietly, whether the kind of partnership she wanted actually existed, or whether it was simply a nice idea that did not survive contact with real life. Then, in the early summer, a family friend mentioned a young man named Yusuf, living in Minneapolis, Minnesota, working as a civil engineer. He had grown up in a modest household himself, the son of a taxi driver who had worked long hours for years to give his children a better start. Farida arranged an introductory call, though this time she did not seem overly hopeful, having grown a little more cautious herself after watching her daughter go through disappointment twice already. Yusuf's first call was different from the start. He asked fewer questions about Zara's financial situation and more about what she actually cared about: her studies, her plans after graduation, what kind of life she pictured for herself in 5 years. "I read online that some families expect a huge wedding, matching outfits, all of that," Yusuf said at one point, almost laughing. "Honestly, that's never made sense to me. My parents had a simple nikah. They didn't have money for anything else. And 40 years later, they're still one of the happiest couples I know. I don't need a big show to know a marriage is real." Zara felt something loosen slightly in her chest, though she remained careful, remembering her mother's advice about patterns instead of words. Over the following weeks, they spoke several more times, always with family present or aware, keeping things respectful and clear. Zara noticed small things about him that seemed to matter. He asked about her mother by name, remembering details she had mentioned only once. He talked about his own mother with clear warmth and respect, never once making a joke at her expense the way some of the other men had, almost carelessly, about their own mothers or sisters. When Zara mentioned she sometimes worried about supporting her family even after marriage, he did not flinch or change the subject. "Of course, you'll keep helping your mother and brother," he said simply. "That's not something I'd ever ask you to give up. If anything, I'd want us to help them together, as a team, once we're actually married and settled." It was such a small sentence, but it stayed with Zara for days afterward. Nobody else had said it so plainly, so easily, like it was simply obvious, rather than something requiring negotiation. Still, she remained careful. She asked him directly, during one of their calls, about money and expectations, wanting to hear it plainly rather than assume anything based on good feelings alone. "I don't want a big wedding," she said. "I don't want gifts or dowry. Just a simple nikah, with both families present, done properly and respectfully. Is that something you're comfortable with? Honestly, not just to be polite." Honestly, Yusuf said, that's exactly what I want too. I've saved some money over the past few years, not for a wedding, but for a future. A small apartment, a stable start. I'd rather put money into building a life with you than into one expensive night that everyone forgets about within a year. Farida, listening from the next room during one of these calls, later told Zara that something in Yusuf's voice reminded her of her late husband, not because they sounded alike, but because of the steadiness underneath the words, the sense that he meant exactly what he said, without needing to convince anyone of it twice. The families arranged an in-person meeting a month later, with Yusuf and his parents traveling from Minneapolis to Houston. Zara watched him carefully throughout the visit, the way her mother had taught her, paying attention not just to what he said at the table, but how he greeted her younger brother, how he spoke to his own mother when he thought no one else was specifically watching, how he thanked Farida for the tea in a way that felt genuine rather than performed. At one point during the visit, Zayn, who was 14 and usually shy around guests, mentioned that he was struggling with a science project due the following week, something about building a small model bridge for his class. Most guests would have nodded politely and moved on. Yusuf asked him several follow-up questions instead, genuinely curious, and by the end of the afternoon, the two of them were sitting on the living room floor together, sketching bridge designs on a notepad while the adults continued talking nearby. Zara watched this from across the room, saying nothing, but noticing everything. Later that evening, after the guests had left, Zayn came to find her in the kitchen. "He's nice," Zayn said simply, drying a dish Zara had just washed. "He actually listened." Most people just say that's nice and change the subject. "You liked him?" Zara asked, smiling despite herself. "Yeah," Zayn said. "He didn't talk to me like I was a little kid. He talked to me like my project actually mattered." Zara thought about that conversation for days afterward. It was a small thing, a single afternoon with a science project, and yet it told her something that no amount of careful questioning on the phone ever could have. A man's patience with a 14-year-old boy who had nothing to offer him revealed more about his actual character than any promise about Dean or family values spoken directly to her. By the end of the visit, both families agreed the match seemed right, and Zara, for the first time in the entire process, felt something closer to peace than doubt. The nikah took place 2 months later in a small hall attached to their local mosque, with close family and a handful of friends present. There were no matching outfits, no elaborate decorations, no expensive dinner. Farida wore her best shalwar kameez, carefully pressed the night before, and Zayn stood proudly beside his sister, wearing a new shirt she had saved a little extra to buy him for the occasion. After the ceremony, as guests slowly began to leave, Zara stood beside her mother for a quiet moment. "Are you happy?" Farida asked softly. "I am," Zara said, and she meant it completely. "Not because everything is solved now. We still have a lot to build, together, slowly. But I finally found someone who actually meant what he said from the very beginning, instead of someone who only sounded right during the meeting." Farida squeezed her daughter's hand. "That is worth more than any big wedding, Beta. That is worth everything." Zara looked across the room at Yusuf, who was laughing quietly with Zayn about something, already treating her younger brother with an easy warmth that felt entirely natural, not forced for the occasion. She thought about all the disappointing conversations before this one, all the moments she had almost convinced herself that she was asking for too much. She hadn't been asking for too much at all. She had simply been waiting for the right person to actually match his words with his character, patiently, the way her mother had always told her real character eventually shows itself if you are willing to watch closely enough and wait long enough to see it. Later that night, after the guests had gone home and the small hall had been cleared, Zara sat with her mother on the porch steps outside their apartment, the warm Houston air settling around them. Zayn had already gone inside, exhausted and happy, still talking about the bridge project he and Yusuf had promised to finish together over video call the following week. "Do you remember what I told you all those months ago?" Farida asked. "About watching patterns instead of listening to words?" "I remember," Zara said. "I didn't fully understand it then. I think I do now. Hamza and Tariq were not bad men," Farida said thoughtfully. "They were simply men who had learned to say the right things without actually living them. It happens more often than you would think, Beta, in every community, not just ours. People learn the language of good character long before they learn the practice of it." "And Yusuf?" "Yusuf never seemed to be performing anything," Farida said. "That is the difference. A man who is truly good does not need an audience to remind him to be good. He is the same person whether you are watching or not, whether it benefits him or not." She reached over and squeezed her daughter's hand. "That is rare, Zara. Do not take it for granted, and do not forget it either, on the days marriage feels difficult, the way it sometimes will." "I won't," Zara said quietly. They sat together for a while longer in comfortable silence, watching the streetlights flicker on, one by one along their quiet street. Zara thought about the years ahead, the slow work of building a life with someone from a different city, in a marriage that had started small and simple, exactly the way she had asked for. There would be challenges, she knew, moving to a new state, adjusting to a new home, continuing to support her mother and brother from a distance instead of under the same roof. None of it would be easy, but for the first time in a long while, she did not feel like she was carrying the weight of the future entirely alone. If you liked this story, please like, comment, and share. More simple and emotional stories are coming soon.